Hi, I'm Dave Trull and welcome to the Trull Gallery. We recently built a patio in our backyard and sadly we had no furniture to use out here. We've been using these folding office chairs and there was talk of buying some furniture or even worse, buying some plastic furniture, and I couldn't have that. And recently I had seen a video of building folding Adirondack chairs and I knew what I had to do. Rather than take the time to design my own chairs, I ordered some plans online and I got them from April Wilkerson, and I've attached the link for that below if you want to get a set of plans yourself. I did make a few changes to April's design, nothing major. The biggest change was switching from the 5/4 stock that she used to 4/4 Western Red Cedar. And I did that because it's lighter, weathers very well, and I think it's a gorgeous wood. So with that said, let's go ahead and build us a set of chairs and see what happens.
The cedar I purchased came with one smooth face and one rough face. Since I don't have a planer yet, I decided to clean up the stock with a belt sander. I used an 80 grit belt and that made quick work of the cleanup. On the smooth side, the planer marks came off in no time. The rough face took a bit longer, but it was still fairly quick. This might be a good time to mention that cedar dust can cause respiratory irritation in some people, and, well, I'm one of them. Since I know it bothers my lungs, I was careful to wear my mask at least most of the time. Once the stock was cleaned up, it was time to lay out the patterns. I used the templates that came with the plans and traced out each of the 18 shaped pieces per chair. Take some time and lay out your pieces to get the best yield from your stock. Most of the open spaces on the board I'm laying out here was used later to create the straight parts of the chair. Once the patterns are all drawn, it's time to cut out the parts. A bandsaw can make quick work of this, but since I don't have one yet, I got out my jigsaw. You can cut just outside your lines and clean up the cuts with files and sandpaper and the like. But I prefer to make my cuts about 1/8 of an inch off the line and clean them up with a router and a template. Which method you choose depends on the tools you have and your preferred method of working. Next came the straight pieces. I started by ripping the stock on my table saw into 1 7/8" strips. All of the straight pieces are the same width, but they are in 3 different lengths. I made sure to cut enough strips for all the parts I needed. Now it was time to cut the strips to length on my miter saw. I started by squaring one end, then sliding the stock to a stop block to ensure the parts were all the same length. Since I had several pieces to make, I cut 2 pieces at a time. I then repeated this process for the pieces of the other length. Now that the stock was all roughed out, it was time to clean them up. I set out my stock, templates, double stick tape, and my router table, and I was ready to get started. I used double-sided tape to adhere the templates to the stock. I start by laying out enough pieces of tape to hold the template in place. Then I lift one corner of each piece before going back and pulling off all the backing strips. This helps keep the tape clean once the dust starts flying. Next, I carefully place the templates on the stock, making sure to place it so that the stock overhangs the templates on all sides. Once I'm happy with the location, I press the two together. To keep things moving, I set up 4 or 5 pieces at a time. Once the stock and templates are ready to go, it's time to clean up the profiles. I'm using a 7/8 inch diameter white side router bit with a bearing top and bottom. And for this application, I'll be using the bottom bearing. I start my cuts along the long grain of each piece, but not at the edge. This prevents any major blowouts when routing the end grain. but even still I take those corners slowly. I work my way around the piece, keeping the template against the bearing. In hindsight, I think I'd have used the templates that came with the plans to make half-inch thick working templates. Thicker templates make me feel like I have more control against the router bit. And speaking of the router bit, this puppy is fairly large, so I slowed the cutting speed down on my router. If you have a single-speed router, I'd recommend using a smaller bit. Now that I have the profiles cut to shape, it was time for another sanding. This time with my random orbit sander and 120 grit paper. This cleans up the belt sander marks, as well as any rust spots from the router. Over at my drill press, I pre-drilled as many of the holes as I could, whether it was a pilot hole for a wood screw or a clearance hole for a bolt. Using the drill press, fence, and stomp let me drill these quickly and accurately. If you don't have a drill press, a hand drill is fine. Just work with care. Some of the locations are pretty close to the edges. With that complete, it was back to the router table, but this time I'm using a 1/4 inch round over bit. This eases the edges on all the parts. The shaped pieces I routed with just the bearing to guide the cut. Here again I start my cuts in the middle of a long grain run and take my end grain corners slowly to prevent any tear out. When I did the straight pieces, I added my fence as a guide and kept the fence opening tight to the bit without them actually touching. It's a bit safer, and I was getting a little brain fried after the first 70 or so pieces. With these, I start on the end grain and then work my way around the piece. Everything except the seat slats were rounded on all sides. The seat slats were left square on their undersides. It's finally time to start the assembly. I use a square on both of the seat rails to hold them upright, and I also use a piece of plywood cut to size to hold everything in place while I fasten the seat rails. Then I placed the front bottom slat and made sure it sat flush to the rails. Using the pilot holes in the slats as guides, I pre-drilled the holes in the rails. Added a bit of Titebond 3 exterior wood glue, and fastened them in place with number 9 2-inch long screws. The plans call for spacing of 1/8 of an inch between the slats, so I taped a pile of cards together and used them as spacers. I then repeated the process of setting the slats on the rails, drilling, gluing, and screwing it in place for the remainder of the seat slats. With that done, I moved on to the arms and attached the vertical supports to them. I'd carefully pre-drilled both sets of pieces and began the assembly by starting the screws in the arms until the points protruded just past flush. A little Titebond 3, and I lined up the holes on the supports with the tips of the screws. Then I drove one screw partially in, and then the other. Once both were holding in the correct location, I tightened the 2 screws in place. Okay guys, here we are on the next day. I just made the backs yesterday and I went to install them today and realized that these 2 pieces, this one and this one, are in the wrong spot. Not a huge deal, and I'm going to show you now how I go ahead and fix that,
because once I take them out, most of the holes will be hidden, but a couple will still show. So let me show you how we do that repair.
I started by disassembling the seat back. Luckily, I had only used screws. After determining which holes would show, I used a 1/4-inch bit and drilled a hole about 1/4 of an inch deep, just deep enough to accept the plugs that I had cut from scrap cedar. Again, a little Titebond 3 on the plugs, and I tapped it into place. Then I trimmed off the excess with a flush cut saw and gave it a quick sanding. So let me show you how to build the backs correctly. I start by clamping the 2 back arches to a piece of plywood, lining up the center lines of the stock. Lay one of the center back slats about 1/8 of an inch off the center lines so that the holes are centered on the arches. Using the pilot hole as a guide, pre-drill the bottom and set a 2-inch screw in place. Then pre-drill one of the upper holes and drive a screw in there as well. The plans call for a 1/4-inch space between the slats, and I'm using some hardboard scraps for that. Now place the other center slat in place. Align the slat tops and then double check the hole locations. Now pre-drill and set the screws in as before. Continue to work out from the center using the spacers, aligning the tops, and drill and fasten the other slats in place. Lastly, go back and pre-drill the second hole in the top of each slat and screw them in place. Bolt the arms to the front legs with a 1/4 20 by 2-inch bolt, a couple washers, and a nut. Start with a bolt and washer from the inside of the front leg, then add the arm assembly and hold it in place with a second washer and nut, but only finger tight at this point. Then add the other arm in the same way. Now, starting with a level surface, place the back on the seat rails about 1/8 of an inch from the last seat slat and clamp it in place. Bring up one of the arms until it's level and mark the location where the armhole meets the upper back arch. I scribed a small arc so I could determine the center of the arch once the arm was out of the way. Then I drilled a 5/32 inch pilot hole centered on the arch. I connected the arm and arch with a 1/4 inch by 2.5 inch lag screw and washer, loose enough to pivot, but so there was no slop in the joint. Then repeat the process for the other arm. Now you can attach the back linkage to the seat rail, again with a 1/4 20 by 2-inch bolt, some washers, and a nut. This linkage is what makes these chairs foldable. Start by putting the bolt and washer through the linkage and then through the seat rail. Fix them in place with another washer and nut, again only finger tight for now. Mark the location of the second hole on the lower back arch as you did with the upper back arch, and then pre-drill with the same 5/32 bit. You can then connect the linkage to the lower back arch with another 1/4 by 2.5 inch lag screw and washer. Again, loose enough to pivot, but with no slop. Then repeat on the other side. The last piece to add is the rear leg support. Fold the chair and set the support in place. Center it on the legs and hold it up against the back linkage. Drill a countersink hole on one side and screw it in place with a 2-inch screw. Then repeat on the other side. Now you can lift the seat back up and out of the way to add a second screw on both sides, and your chair is fully assembled. I partially disassembled the chairs to add finish to them, and I chose to use Thompson's Clear Water Seal. One coat was all it took, and it doesn't raise the grain like other finishes do. I'll probably need to recoat every year or so, but that's okay since it's a fairly quick process. Simply brush on the finish, let it sit for about 20 minutes, and then wipe off any excess oil. And yes, by the time I was finished, my outside work table was now fully protected from the rain.
And here it is, one of the 4 chairs we've just built. It's going to give us years of enjoyment out here on our patio. They're comfortable and they look good. If you have any comments about what we could have done better, different, more efficiently, please leave them down below. Love to hear what you have to say. Also, before I forget, we now have these great Trull Gallery t-shirts. I've put the links down below for both the men's and ladies fit. And if you'd like to help support the channel, buy yourself a t-shirt or 2, and we'll be able to keep going with the work we've been doing. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a thumbs up and maybe share it with your friends and family. If you'd like to see what else is coming up in the future, hit that subscribe button. We've got some tables to go along with these chairs, also in cedar. I've got the design, got the stock in there. Got some I've also got a few pieces for clients lined up, as well as some work on this 95-year-old house. And of course, we're getting closer and closer to pulling the trigger on building that shop over here in the corner. So I look forward to showing you guys what's coming up next. So for now, have a great day. Thanks for tuning in. See you soon.